Ju, Nagi Kiai, Ben Bibokumakwa, Netelamapo, Wawa Shishio Dewey Demiwa, Gramapo, Muncie. I'm Chief Perry of the Ramapo Muncie, and I more than want to thank David for all the help he's provided in the trail conference. For all of the help each and every one of you have provided in restoring and holding the so many cultural stone features and et cetera in this area. It's most people don't know, but to give you a little background on the tribe and the importance of preserving this culture, and it's just coming out now. It's important for the people and America in general. Without the help of the Ramapo Muncie, this is a big statement, but the truth is verifiable. There would be no New York, no New Jersey, and no United States of America. Now that's a big statement, but I'll just pare it down to saying this. We are being overlooked at this point by one of the most sacred spiritual places in this area for our people and actually for the country. Recently, we were visited by the Mamos, who are from Colombia. They come out of their homes about once. They spend the first 9 months of their lives isolated in the mountaintops in Colombia. They came here particularly to share with us the importance of the Tahitaway split rock right here that's overlooking where we're setting. But before they came, thanks to David and a lot of you folks, we've been able to preserve that site for posterity, and we're now looking to make that site a World Heritage Site. And we're negotiating with that right now. But to go back with simply say the importance of it, the mountain overlooks the Ramapo Pass that George Washington was never got to use without my aunt's take off his constitutional help. So, you know, we didn't use that term. But the point is, our people overlook not only the pass, but guard up the Hudson River without the use.
Hold on a minute. Wait till they figure this
Out here.
Yeah.
You just put down the name on it?
Can you increase the volume? Or not sure? Okay.
The technical wonders of the world.
If everybody online could make sure that they are muted. I think that's where we're getting our. You can mute.
You can mute everybody.
I think we should be good. We should be good.
I think she heard you.
Yeah. Sorry?
Scientific.
All right, you're on.
Yeah, let's make this short, but the reason that my ancestors were so integral to the founding of this country is because without the use of the Ramapo Pass and the free passage of the Hudson River, the only way that the British could resupply their troops was off the Atlantic or march them down through Canada. That effectively eliminated any strategic surprise and or advantage that may have had. At that time, in order to get permission to use it, they used to actually say the Ramapo were like women. That was a compliment and meant that because of the wisdom we used to settle disputes between other peoples. But the wonderful thing was after we allowed George Washington to station 5,000 troops in the pass, you want to know that the first 900 cannonballs fired in the American Revolution was made from Ramapo-Lenape iron deposits. Chain across the Hudson was made from Ramapo-Lenape iron deposits. The Capitol Dome was made from Ramapo-Lenape iron deposits. And the very first thing that George Washington did, because he never lies, he blessed us by trying to enslave us. From that day till now, we are still struggling, and thanks to people like David and others that's been uncovering these sacred landscapes and people like yourselves that protect and look over the forest, we're in a much better way, and our world is in a much better way. So for that, I would like just to thank each and every one of you. And bless you and ask that you continue to go forward, lifting up all that you may. Nishi, 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 Lumumati, the whole Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to start off by promising you one thing. You may not understand it now, but you understand it at the end of the program. You will never walk in the woods the same way again. You will never walk as fast as you used to. And you will taking and be pausing to look at stone features to say, is it or isn't it Native American? You'll understand within the next hour. Before I begin, I want to clear up a couple things. As to where I'm at in terms of permits. I have a Palisades Park permit for the various Palisades Park. And it's the first permit to actually go out and research, document, the ceremonial stone landscapes in the lower Palisades, in the Palisades area. I've also got permits with other various New York State land agencies such as DEC to document ceremonial landscapes on their properties as well. And all the work, all the reports that I write that are approved by the property owner, be it the state, national parks, private owners, or whatever, and the Native American, is allowed to be put into my National Archive file in Washington, DC. And with limitations, because the limitation is we do not give away the location of any of these sites. These sites are held confidentially within the Park Commission or to the private landowner. I may show you pictures of like this stone feature here, but I will not tell you where it's located for the security of the site or for the individual stone feature. And this is standard operating procedure on both the Federal Preservation Act, the State Preservation Act, and as well as preservation acts within the Confederation of Tribes, Native American First Nations throughout the United States. So if you see something, don't say, where is that? Because I won't tell you, but I'll tell you, all of the images I'm showing you are from the lower Hudson Valley and northern New Jersey. So the Catskills, either side of the Hudson River, on down to where we are in northern New Jersey. So the stone features, once we talk about this area, are there. Now, where we're going to begin is going to surprise you because you're going to get thrown off as I start off where I'm going to talk about the ceremonial stone landscape first. But hang in there because it's a progression of thought that leads you to where we are here. Second of all, keep in mind that until recently, these features in the Northeast, in the last, if you were there 30 years ago, no non-native archaeologists to speak of, except for a very few, actually recognize these features as being Native American. Ironically, throughout most of North America, the rest of North America, the South, the Midwest, the West, into Canada, these features are recognized. But here, they have not been still officially recognized as Native American sites. So we're really pushing this to educate the public, educate the academia that these are Native American, and we can show it. And I'll show you how I do that. So we'll explain that as we go. When you're out walking in the woods, oh, I forgot, I gotta be on camera, I gotta go over here. This is a different system than I normally use. You're out walking in the woods, you ever run across the cairn like that and wonder who built it? They turned off my advancer. Where's your AV guys? My advancing system is turned off. All right, don't touch anything there. Let's see what we got. All right, now we're on. All right, so have you ever seen something like that? Wondered where it came from? Have you ever seen a odd stone pile deep out in the woods, far away from farming, no stone walls around, and wonder who put it there? And then you might look in the woods and you might see jumping. I hope it doesn't do that again. You might see a group, a line of stone features going out across the woods. You may have it cross your mind that maybe some farmer was going to build a wall, or maybe the guys who were mapping the original patterns at the time of the Dutch were laying out stone piles along where they were documenting the property lines. Or could it be something else? And then you come across something like this. Now, if you ask a typical geologist, what is that? They're going to say it's a glacier erratic. A glacier erratic is a stone, a boulder that was brought here by the glaciers. It was not brought here by human beings in most cases. You got to realize, go back 20, 30,000 years ago during the last ice age, this area was covered by thousands of feet of snow, of ice. The ice came down from Canada. And as it approached and came to this area, it was like a conveyor belt. It picked up all kinds of rock material, carried it on the glaciers. Then when it retreated, it dropped those stones. So you go out there and you look at these two stones and you look at the bedrock and it doesn't match. And you say, well, where'd they come from? They're not indigenous to this area. They're not common to this area. They came from Canada, Canadian Shield. And the glacier dropped them off. Now here's a question. Notice the two boulders. How many agree they're basically the same size? You agree with that? Basically the same size. Notice the boulders underneath. Actually stone/boulders. There are 3 under each one, forming a triangle. In addition to that, right here, the surface between the two stones has been pecked to a flat surface. So when you put them together, they are actually resting on equal platforms against each other to give it stability. Now the question is, how did it get that way? One possibility, it's a glacier drop. But if that's the possibility, I propose that that was a very smart glacier. All right? The other possibility is human beings did that. And why would they do that? What does this mean? Is there something more to it that we're not understanding or thinking about? Well, all these features have a commonality. Take a look at this one. What do you see in imagery? Do you see a living creature here? How many see? What do you see? Yell it out.
Looks like an owl at the top.
An owl? Let's go further.
Turtle.
You see a turtle? How many see the turtle? Yeah, most see the turtle. Look at a turtle head, eye, mouth, peeking out from a great shell. This is a glacier erratic that has been placed there. However, when you look at that, is it more than coincidence that a glacier placed that boulder sticking out at that end, and it has an eye, a mouth, nose, the shape of a turtle? Again, I ask the question, the possibility of a very smart glacier or human culturally modified. Well, all of these features we're showing so far, we're missing the top of our slides. The top of the labels are missing completely here. We gotta do something. Can you tilt that down?
You can move the ball.
Do you know how to do this?
The other issue is that you have a clicker.
Hold on, people.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what's causing it. You gotta get that out of there. And we're still missing the top.
Yeah, that's, we can't change this.
All right. All right, we're gonna miss some of it, but what it says is all of these are part of what are called sacred and ceremonial Native American landscapes. all of those features that I showed you previously. Now let's get into it. Now, how I got involved with this is kind of interesting. We're getting problems. This is not working again.
Because I click on the screen again. Let's do this. Hold this. Push this in. It's 39 people. It's put it on the actual document. I'm sorry.
Right now.
I don't know if they can hear it.
Yeah, but.
All right, now we're back.
Can they?
All of this begins with something I became involved with, not here, but in the Andes Mountains. Now, I am 77 years old. I've been a member of the New York State Archaeology Association since I was 15. Do the math. I'm 60 years in the New York State Archaeology Association. In addition to that, the first 50 years, I worked mainly as a traditional native of the non-native archaeologist. We dig squares, we find artifacts, we document it, and we interpreted what the Native Americans were doing here. However, with this, there's something else. I was asked to go to Nazca, Peru, to look for wells. I did not go to Nazca, Peru to look at, what's the big one down there? The Nazca lines. How many are familiar with the Nazca lines? Good. The Nazca lines are the drawings on the Florida desert that when you fly over, you see them all. Now, I went to Nazca because I have experience in geology, hydrology, and archaeology. And with my geology, hydrology backgrounds that I've developed over the years, I've had experience of going out and finding wells for international organizations in various parts of the world, in Africa and South America and other places. So I was asked to go to Nazca to help them in a severe drought. And I went to Nazca and I got involved with a major project that has never ended. And this is in 1995. And during that project, I ended up spending time, very fortunate for this, to spend time in the Andes Mountains with the Quechuan people and their shamans and their spiritual leaders and their chiefs who still follow so much of the Inca traditional spiritual and cultural beliefs, and was able to be with them during many ceremonies. And what you come back with is you start to learn, as Chief Perry is well aware of, because he practices this, how you think if you are a Native American and how Native Americans related to the landscape, to Earth, before contact with the Europeans, or any ancient culture before modern religion. Modern religions, Muslim, Hindu, Islam, Christian, those are modern religions. But if you go back far enough in time, in any of the regions you come from, I don't care where you are, anywhere in the world, wherever your ancestors come from, in ancient history, they believed in the same basic concepts I'm about to project now. So we all have this common past. Now, this is one of the top spiritual leaders in the Quechuan culture of the Andes Mountains of Peru. And I was with him at a ceremony at this small lake, you might call it a pond, but it is the most sacred body of water along the west coast of South America. And it has a reputation because in that lake, Native American cultures have made offers to that lake since the first cultures developed and the ice melted back from the Andes and left what we call a cirque. This is a area where a glacier came out of the side of the mountain and this little lake is developed. And they gave offerings. And so we know from what's in that lake, how long the Native Americans have been here making offerings, and they're still doing it. Now, what's important about this is when he began his ceremony, he stood and he looked this way, and he thanked the 4 cardinal points, north, south, east, and west. Then he went and he turned to earth. In his language, Pachamama, to the Algonquin and those in this region, most often a general concept known as Manitou. When you go out west with the Apache, as I have in the Hopi and the Navajo, it's another expression, but it all means the same thing. It translates into Mother Earth. And we come from Mother Earth to the surface. Our ancestors lived beneath the surface. And we are come to the present world. And then we also are guided by the spiritual world of the cosmos, the 3 worlds. In the 3 worlds, you have the cycle of water. The cycle of water begins here in the sky, it falls on earth, it collects. Water percolates down into the underworld, and it falls into the bedrock. It becomes to you known as the water table, but it's in the bedrock beneath our feet. And water nourishes life in all 3 worlds, to the spirits above, to us in the present, and the nourishment to the people in the underworld. And water, therefore, is life. And the cycle of water is the cycle of life. Now watch what happened. I'm also worked throughout the world as an international photographer, specializing in environmental issues and wildlife. And my photos have been all over the world. However, when I was there for this ceremony, I wasn't there as a photographer trying to capture it. He gave me permission to take pictures. I didn't know what was coming. But then he raised his baton and I happened to be in the right place. He dipped it and he said, I give my heart to Pachamama. And as he did, he went like that. And by coincidence, I snapped the photograph, and what did I get? Half the heart. There's the heart. I give my heart to Pachamama, and I happened to catch it in film. And then he went on with an extensive ceremony showing the relationship of the 3 worlds, our part of that 3 worlds. People often look at it and they say, oh, come on, I can't believe my ancestors believed in it. Did you ever hear of Greek mythology and Greek ancient history? Did you ever hear of Delphi? And what happened at Delphi? They had the female oracles, and even Alexander the Great went to them and said, give me guidance. And where were they? Delphi sits on a fault zone, which has water passing through it and fumes coming up, which actually sort of like gave them stimulus to make their predictions. It goes back wherever you are around the world. You will find this in ancient history. This taught me something. It taught me, previously looking at Native American sites as an archaeologist, being born and raised as a Presbyterian and a Christian and a Catholic. My mother was Catholic, my father was Presbyterian, I was raised with both. I couldn't think that way. I had to think about the sites in the same perspective that ancient Native Americans to current, and I say that on behalf of Chief Perry, current Native Americans think of these sites. And that changed the perspective on which I approach archaeological sites. Now, different techniques. Now, in addition to that, as an anthropological introduction, we begin with the scientific research. In the scientific research, we do both scientific and experimental research. Soon after I made my breakthrough that I'm about to explain in Peru, I introduced it to scientists once I had enough evidence, and the University of Massachusetts at Amherst joined on, the geoscience department, anthropology department. I quit my day job teaching high school history at Arlington High School in Poughkeepsie, New York, and became a full-time archaeologist dealing with geology, hydrology, and archaeology. And we went down there and started studying what I had come up with. And what we found was using all the modern technology in the world, seismic, electromagnetic conduction, and water testing, to determine where the sources of water were coming from. That I was saying came from two sources, we realized something. We were finding concentrated flows within the groundwater that were extremely difficult to find with our scientific equipment. But all the indications indicated, which I will show you, the Native Americans had already documented it before us. So one of the things we did is I said, look, we can't go out and use modern equipment. Because the archaeological sites we're looking at are 2,000 years old. They didn't have seismic. They didn't have chemical analysis of water like we do. They didn't have these techniques. So I said, we have to experiment with things that would have been available to them. And we did that. And what we found was our senses are some of our best guides, bar all the other scientific equipment, just using our senses, hearing, seeing, smelling, observing differences in plants or bedrocks. Through that process, one of the things I started on was using metal dowsing rods. And I learned that I could use metal dowsing rods and they worked. Now, if you were here, I've been in this with the ceremonial stone landscapes now over 30 years. But if you were to talk to me 40 years ago and say, I would be talking about dowsing today and using it as a method, I would laugh at you and say, no, I just can't believe dowsing. But I tested it. I kept an open mind. And I said, we have to try everything. And I used dowsing with metal rod because it gave me the best results. But we can use wood, we don't need metal. We can predate metal in the Bronze Age and use various forms of wood. My wife there, Priscilla, and I have also spent a lot of time in Kenya, living with remote tribal groups. How many know what the Maasai are like? You know, the Maasai, the nomads, and the most resistant to cultural change, still living like they did. We are not a part of the Maasai, but we have been over 50 years part of the Orma culture in northeastern along the coast of Kenya. And they're very much like the Maasai, and they resist modern change. So they practice a lot of their ancient beliefs, and we've been close to that. I'm an elder in that society, and at times they ask me to help advise and work with them, even though I'm here and not a part of it. We're still members. When I was there about 10 years ago, we went back to look for wells for the Orma people and people located in northeastern Kenya because the drought was so bad. And I went in with International Red Cross, the Kenyan government, and the local regional governments of Kenya to locate wells. And when I got back to my clan, our family there, the Hanturo clan, they mentioned to me, one of your distant nephews, meaning in the clan, to you, it's a distant nephew. When you're in a clan, if it's her son's daughter, it's still a niece or a nephew. And so they said, one of your nephews is also dowsing now. I says, I gotta meet him. And when I met him, he showed something that shows ancient thought and how it could be used to explain how to find the water sources that I'm going to be describing in the next 10 minutes. I asked him, how do you do it? He's never had an education. He was 28 at the time. When he was born, about the time he was 7, 8, he was sent out with the young boys and the young heifers and young goats, given a spear and a club, and herd the young cattle during the day. As he became a teenager, he became a warrior. He was given a full-fledged spear, sidearm blade, club, go herd the cattle like the Messiah. You're out all day doing it. And he said, one of the things that my grandfather and father told me is don't worry about where the animals are going. They will lead you. And when they sense water, what do? Everybody knows the answer to this. They run straight away to the water. How many have heard that before? You ever heard that? Yeah, that's an old saying. And when they hit water, they run straight away to it. And what did he say to me? Here I'm a kid and I'm out there. And all of a sudden I see the animals taking off and they go zoom, zoom, zoom. They run like that to get to the water. I came back to my grandparents and my father and I says, what'd you tell me? You said they run straight to the water. They don't run straight. They went this way, they went that way, they went to the water. He said, oh, no. That's a saying, they run straight to the water. But by the time you get there, it's straight to the water. But he thought, wait a minute. Why are the animals running that way? What does he have to do the 12 hours he's out with the herds every day? Nothing but watch the herds and scare away dangerous animals or somebody who wants to steal a cow. So he's got tons of time, he said, to think, and he'd follow the animals. What kind of plants are they following? Wait a minute, they went this way. The plant is different than there and there. The bedrock is different here than there and there. The trees are different. I smell something different. And then that's how we started to figure out where the water was underground. No education, no degree in the university. He is one of the best people in Kenya for finding new wells using the knowledge he learned from that technique. So there are 1,000 ways in our past that people could have located groundwater without modern technology. And some of them are in my book. That's one that's in my book, but there are more. So what did I find? What I found when I went and started doing my research is that you have a water table. And then where faults or bedrock fractures intersect those water tables, water can flow into those bedrock fractures and faults and be conducted over long distances. This is nothing new. This has been known to geology and hydrology for years. Even the Romans practiced this concept in finding sources for their aqueducts to their cities. Now, what I found though, is I found something related to this in terms of Native American sites. Let me go further. Here's an explanation of a fault, a geological fault. Do you see what I mean by offset? This bedding is offset by that off bedding. The fault is split the rock. One side went up, the other went down. And then you have this bedrock fracture fault. Geological fault is like St. Andreas fault. That's very large, some can be very small. And water collects in there, and the water travels along a path. What I found is that archaeological sites of the past both here in North America and other parts of the world, are located on those types of water sources. So bedrock fractures can be very wide, very narrow, but that's where these sites are located. Let me explain where I started. Nazca, Peru. This is where the line to Nazca are. This is the city of Nazca. This up here, well, it's off screen, but that's the Andes Mountains in the far distance. And if you squint, you can see little white dots for the snow cap. We're about 70, 80 miles from the top of the 20,000 foot Andes Mountains down to Nazca. The elevation change 20,000 feet down to about 1,200 to 1,500 feet. So we have a 18 to 19,000 drop off from the Andes. That's east, this is west. We're almost on the coast. Now, why was I asked to Nazca to help find water? How much water do they have? Show me the crops. Hardly any fields have crops in. Look at the rivers. Here's the Aja, here's the Terras Blancas River. The picture was taken in mid-July. What's missing? Water. There's no water running down the river. The water runs down the river in February into early March as the runoff from the Andes takes place. And then it dries up and the water table in the river resides down to about 45 to 50 feet below surface. And by June, July, right through to December, the rate of flow of water is like 1 or 2 gallons a minute. Is that going to sustain a community of 15, 20,000? You're in trouble. However, obviously they survive. So when they asked me down there to help them find water, and I went down and met with the water department, and one of the first questions I asked them was, the rivers are dry and everything, where do you get the water from? And they said, oh, no, it's covering up my things. We got to move it a little bit. All right, it's the Puquios. Now, you all know what a Puquio is, don't you? I had no idea. I looked at them and I said, what the heck's a Puquio? And they said, oh, we'll take you. And they took me to this location called Aja. And they said, this is at least a 2,000-year-old Puquio. This is not modern. The ancient Native American Nazca people were using this 2,000 years ago. And what they did is they dug a hole 30 feet deep to where they hit water. And then they dug a gallery, a trench, an aqueduct, if you want to call it, to conduct the water further downstream for people to get it. Ingenious. Beautiful engineering, 2,000 years ago. And then I asked them and I said, where's the water come from? Canadian geologists there at the time and the water department all looked at me and said, the river. I'm standing up on a hill. I'm looking down towards the river. How deep's the water in the river? About 50 feet deep. How high above the river is the water in the well? We measured it. About 35 feet. 50 and 35 is how much? Huh? 85 feet at that time? What is the possibility of the water in the river at a rate of flow of 1 to 2 gallons a minute going and flowing uphill 85 feet to that spring where it's coming out at 10 to 15 gallons a minute? It not only went uphill from the river, but it increased its flow by 15 times. How many agree with that one? You think that's possible? Right away, I said, well, something's wrong. It can't be. Geology, it would have to be an artesian well system, number one. We checked that, it didn't work. Then I said, water has to be coming from another source. And the thought was, it has to be coming from through bedrock fractures and faults in the mountains. So I said, I want to start and look at an area and see if there's water coming from the sides of the valley. And this is the area I tested on first. It's called Pintayo Puquio. And if you look right here, see the holes there? Can you see that? This is the Puquio. Right by the Puquio, there are some active fields that date back to ancient times. How do we know? Pottery shards there tell you how old it is. Right here is a big habitation cemetery site. Again, when I asked them where the water comes from, the river. But the flow was too great. So I got permission to walk this area up here. One of the things about then, 1996, no satellite images. We had nothing like that. So therefore, it was hard rock geology. You didn't do it from a desk and a screen. You went out and you walked it. So I walked all this by myself. Eventually, they gave me 2 people to go with me to make sure I came back. And I mapped in red every place I found a fault fracture, a fracture in the bedrock that could conduct water coming from the Andes up there, miles away, but much higher water source. Then, because of the bedrock fracture and sands and that on it, you couldn't tell where the water was, so I used my dowsing rods. And I mapped in blue every location where I found courses of water. And if you notice up here on the hills, everywhere I found a bedrock fracture or a fault, I also found a course of water. And then right here, there's a major fault coming down from that mountain, right through that mountain. And all of these tend to intersect it, and the water collection follows that fault to the river. And then I found it turned into the river. So the water going to that Puquio is actually, the majority of it is coming from the side of the valley, not from the river. But when the river has enough flow in it in February, water will also enter the Puquio. But as I'm doing that, I had one of these moments which bring you to your knees. I literally had to sit down. Standing here by this cemetery on a small hill, I realized something else. Now I'm going to show you a square right here. Come on, not again. You're gonna have to look at it. It just died again. You gotta keep on this, or we're gonna be all night. All right. And this area, I want to show you in detail. This is what I'm looking at on the ground. What do you see? You see the zigzags? You see the line? Do you see the spiral over here? All of these symbols, what are they? The lines of Nazca. And what did I realize all of a sudden on that day? The lines in Nazca were mapping the same water sources that I was finding. That was a life change. Then I spent 2 years going back there. Thank God for sponsor from Rotary International, the Rotary Club down by Newburgh, and other agencies. And I went back down there and explored this for 2 years before I went to the scientist on it and said, I think I got something. And then they joined on because I had enough evidence to bring them in. But this is what it looks like when it's highlighted here. The lines in Nazca are literally mapping where the water is coming down into the valley here. And we've tested on it. Not that we asked to test on it, but when I presented this, and wherever I go, anywhere in the world that I'm working on a project, I call for a community assembly. I want the people in the area where I'm working know who I am and identify with me and know how I'm trying to help them. And so soon after I made that discovery, we called in the community. Like here, we expected a handful. 100 showed up that filled the church hall we were in and exploded out to the outside of the building. And what happened? The farmer over here and the farmer over there heard about this and didn't have adequate wells. And they scratched their nose, scratched their head and said, "My God, that's right on my farm." Without telling me, they went over and they hand dug wells because I told them the water was near surface. The first one to call me was Alfredo from this well. And he said, sent one of his workers and he says, "Tell David to come over." This was only a week later. When I arrived and I looked at him, he was in a well. And he was only about 15 feet deep. And I said, "Whoa, you got water." He said, "Thanks a lot. You've given me a big problem." I says, "What's the problem?" He says, "No, I got so much water, I don't know what to do with it." The well is run for 30 years nonstop. We know the water's there. We've taken the water samples with the University of Massachusetts. It's different than the water in the river. Water is coming from that source. Then during that same presentation, an older man in his 80s, I'm almost there now. But when I was 50, he came to me and he came walking right down through the assembly of people and he says, "David, you talk about water here in Cantayo." He says, "You know that fault we're talking about?" He says, "Up on top of that mountain, I mine gold and silver from that very fault you're talking about." And he says, "When we go up there, we can't use pack animals because of the lines in Nazca. We can't cross them. We go up there for a week or two and we carry all our supplies, our hammers, our chisels, everything on our back, everything we need to stay up there for 2 weeks." Then he posed the question, what's the one thing we can't carry enough of to keep us there for a week? And the answer is water. I looked at him and I says, "You know, there's water up there?" The next day, we hiked to the high spring of Cantayo. The spring is located 1,000 feet above the river. And we tested that spring for 12 years, 4 times a year, to see if it ran, climbed up there every time. And it's constantly producing water during that whole time, and the water in that well is not the same as the river, but similar to the Pukia. The ancients had figured it out. Then we took that knowledge and we tested it to site and site and site and site again, all throughout the west coast of Peru and Chile for 1,500 miles from the coast to the tops of the Andes. It worked. During that time, we sent out our information, shared it with people in conferences all over the world, and people started saying, "My God, I never thought of that, but you got to come to our place." And something else happened. You see, when you look at the Nazca lines, they look like lines. And they form not only figures of the whale, the hummingbird, which you are familiar with mostly on television. What they form, most of them, are geometric shapes. A trapezoid, which ends here, a triangle, which ends here, a line that extends up here. And I began to realize that those were right on the water, and therefore this was a geometric hieroglyphic. And then I started to interpret the geometric hieroglyphics. What does that mean? What is the function of a trapezoid, a triangle, and a line? Because this is mapping where the water comes from the Andes, under the desert unseen, and where it intersects the Nazca Valley and comes out in springs. The ancients had documented. And therefore, I started working on each symbol and applying it to the known geology, hydrology, and cultural beliefs that I had. And the first breakthrough came with the trapezoid. I realized the trapezoid literally mapped the course of water, and it showed the direction of flow. The trapezoid, short end, wide end. The short end always points to where the water's flowing. But second of all, something else. What does the widths mean? It not only showed the direction of flow, it shows the rate of flow during the wet season and the dry season. Look at any creek. Look at this creek out here. During the dry season, it's narrower, lower flow. During the wet season, it's wider, greater flow. Same thing here. The narrow end maps the dry season when the least amount is coming through. The wide end maps the highest rate of flow. That's remarkable. They did this more than 1,500 to 2,000 years ago, and they got it right. And the other scientists with me agreed. Then there's something else. I started breaking down all these symbols to where we could read that now. And it's in my book called Beneath the Nazca Line and Other Coastal Geoglyphs. And then something else pops in. When you fly the Nazca lines, they look like lines. But I've had permission to walk the Nazca lines. And when I walk the Nazca lines, they're not so much lines, they're dotted lines. And the dotted lines, when you see them from a plane, 1,500, 2,000 feet up, look like lines. Well, all of a sudden, when I started seeing dotted lines, I went like this. I gotta go home. Because for 17 years, I ran a high adventure explorer post for scouts out of Poughkeepsie, New York, and we scoured all these hills and mountains like you do. We love the trails, we love the environment, and did lots of hikes. And every once in a while, we saw a stone pile and looked at it and said, who the heck would have made that stone pile out here? Must have been some hippie or Art Deco guy or something, because it's totally out of place. But all of a sudden, I thought, my God, I gotta go back in the woods because we've got it home. So now you know where I'm going with this. So with that knowledge, back to New York State, northern New Jersey. I went and started looking at those stone piles, lines of stone piles going into the woods. And what did I find? Right on bedrock fractures with concentrated flows in. And if you follow it long enough, it'll even take you to a freshwater spring. In addition to that, I found Native American sites consistently on those stone lines. If it's a narrow flow, it'll have a stone pile the width of the flow on it. But what happens if the flow is 30 feet wide? When a flow is 30 feet wide, it has stone piles on both boundaries. So here's the width of the flow. You have stone pile, cairn on each boundary. And if you know how to read them, you look and you say, oh, it's that wide. So for example, take the aisle. On this aisle being that narrow, you have a stone pile followed with stone pile for the width. If it's the width of these chairs, there would be a line of cairns, just like those chairs, a line of cairns or stone piles, just like those over here, giving you the width. Then, something else came up. As I went from site to site, as in the Nazca Line Syndrome, as I followed the Nazca lines, I realized in Chile, in Nazca, in northern Peru, in Bolivia, the same type of Nazca lines the same type of lines and geoglyphs I had in Nazca were used throughout the system. It was an international hieroglyphics to the Native Americans down there. So now, as I approach these symbols, these stone features, I look for a commonality. This is a tall cairn on a Native American ceremonial and sacred site, not far from here. See that stone, and see the beak-like stone. This is 5 feet tall. Now watch. This one is 6 feet tall. Same shape. Do you see something? Let's compare them. Remember the beak?
Mhm.
See the beak?
Mhm.
See the center stone? Here's the center stone. See the stone here? Look at the shape here. Look at the shape of the overall cairns. They're within 1 feet of elevation of each other and equal diameter at the base. The assumption is they're either made by the same blueprint, the same person, or it's an international language or symbol. That one's in Colorado. 2,300 miles from this one. This is in New York State. And now I begin looking at the similarities between the stone features. And what I've come to realize, as you're going to see now, these are the stone features we have here, right among us. And many we know of right in this area. That these features were used clear across the continent, and I've done hundreds of sites to prove this to myself, forget anybody else, just to myself. And others who have joined on have come to the same conclusion, that we find this format throughout North America among all Native Americans. It is as Native American as a Native American's DNA, as Native American as a Native American fingerprint. The other question is, do we get, well, some farmer put it there clearing the land. Some hiker built it there to show the way to go from trail to trail. My favorite, sheep herders used it so they didn't get lost. If you live in a given area all your life, before modern transportation, most people didn't move more than 10 miles from their house. 20 miles was a long distance. Do you need all kinds of stone features to tell you where you are? You would probably catch on to that by the time you got through childhood. Now, so therefore, there's another explanation. That these are culturally modified, culturally developed Native American features. And we've had evidence to that. Cairns like this are always found on concentrated flows. They are often placed in high points and used for line of sight markers over long distance. And then in between that area, other features will be located to guide you. Before I go on, remember one thing. These were located throughout this region. We have occupied this region and put in modern towns and cities and destroyed many of these features. So when you find these features in the woods, you may find a cluster, 5 or 10, maybe 100 of them, but they went beyond that, but they have been destroyed beyond that. So you can study it in smaller areas only. Now let's go on. So that's one feature. Here's another feature. We call it up here in the east, the crescent cairn. U-shaped crescent cairn. What you can't see here is that U-shaped crescent cairns are always located on concentrated flows, as I say in my beliefs and theories, and that's proven. And they're associated with ancient Native American trails here. And we have found several in this region. And I didn't come up with their association to ancient Native American trails here. This was understood before I got involved. What I associated it with was the underground water. So that's a very distinctive shape. Think of it as a crescent moon when you see them. They can be small, only 3-4 feet across, the largest one we have is in, right here, regionally, a few miles from here, and it is 45 feet across the crescent. The crescent is so big, you almost wouldn't identify it in the woods if you weren't careful and look for it. So now what happens? As I travel out west and I'm starting to look at sites throughout North America, what are the chances of finding crescent cairns associated with ancient trails is a thought. When I first started to go out in the Southwest, I notified some of the archaeologists there. We had conversations before I went out. And I happened to mention some things. They said, do you have cairns out where you are? And oh, yes, I do. Do you? Yeah. And then I said, do you have crescent cairns out there? No, we don't have crescent cairns. And then I went out west, and this is what I found. Literally the first day. Now, do you see a similarity between them? It's almost identical and identical inside. And I said to this researcher, who is one of the top researchers in the Anasazi culture, I says, I thought you said you didn't have crescents. We don't. We call them herradures. If you know your Spanish, Spanish is horseshoe. So he says, to us, they look like horseshoes. To you, they look like, we didn't even know we were talking about the same terms, about the same feature. We had different language on it. So now we're unifying that. And we're calling it a crescent cairn. And what did he tell me when I saw that? I didn't tell him out east are associated with Native American trails. He said they're always found along ancient Chaco Anasazi roads and are a road marker. Have you ever heard of the Anasazi culture, Chaco Canyon? They built hundreds of miles of pristine, well-marked roads to travel from site to site. I've documented hundreds of them, worked out there with the Navajo and others on it. And all of the Chaco roads, predominantly on concentrated flows, but where there isn't a concentrated flow, they go and connect to a concentrated flow as much as possible. Why do I keep on saying that? Because let's say this aisle right here is a concentrated flow. If I'm walking over here as an ancient Native American, modern beliefs too, I'm not in alignment with the spiritual world, the present world, and the underworld. When I'm walking on the concentrated flow in the fold, in the fracture beneath my feet, I'm in line with the underworld, the present world, and any astronomical alignments associated with it. Does that sound strange? Well, let's go to modern religion. If you are, many people don't go to church much anymore, but if you do go to church, why do you go to church and why is the altar so sacred? It's to put you in alignment with what? God. To bring everyone in alignment with your religion and God. This is the same thing. It's just been expanded into another religion with a little different connotation out of ancient. So you see a U-shaped crescent cairn herradura, you're on a Native American ancient trail, and it's still very much a marker, and we have found many here. They still exist. Circles. I love it. When we argue the small circles, we put that out to the non-believers, and they say, oh, that's a campfire pit. Jesus, you're crazy. That's a teepee ring. That's 5 feet across. All right, let's build a lodge out of that, 5 feet. Give me the smallest person in the room and let's have you go lay down comfortably. I you think you're gonna fit? I don't think so. If it's a fire pit or a lodge, where's the charcoal? There's no fire pit in it. It's all by itself. And those are always associated with other ceremonial stone landscape features. The diameter of the circle is equal to the width of the concentrated flow it's on. And when they are dotting along the course of a flow, it indicates where other flows intersect, and there'll be other features taking you off to the side. In addition to that, features like that can combine with other features and mean much more. Tell a paragraph. Now, what's the chance of finding them in other places? Well, we go out to Colorado, we find circles just like this. I'm working on a major project in northern Alabama right now with the Cherokee. And what do we have down there? Circles, just like this. This particular circle, right at that location, has a 6,000-year-old projectile point placed in the center. The archaeologist says that is coincidence. So at some point in time, 6,000 years ago, a Native American happened to be walking along and happened to drop a beautiful obsidian point in dead center of that circle. Or you put it there intentionally. Considering we've seen this repeat itself hundreds of times, it was put there intentionally for sure. We've seen it too many times. What's it look like? I don't know if you can read that up there. Oh, it's down here. It didn't get covered. What does it look like? Turtle cairn. You see the eye, the mouth, you see the flipper, it even has a tail. We have archaeologists today in New Jersey and New York State who will tell you farmers have built that, not a Native American. Well, I challenge that. What is the turtle to Native American? Very sacred. It's a part of the birthing stories and the coming to the present world in many of the different cultures. All of the Native Americans who live where turtles are indigenous to their environment, it is sacred to them. The turtle clan is very sacred within the clan structure. The turtle, amphibious, can go into the underworld, underwater, come to the present world, and can associate with the sky, all three worlds. They're seen as spokespersons. Turtle cairns have more than that. A turtle cairn like that on a narrow, can be on a narrow concentrated flow. So if a turtle cairn, you find it and it's this big around, it's marking a flow this wide. But if you start to look and you see turtle cairn here, turtle cairn there, turtle cairn here, turtle cairn there, it's the width of the flow. And then we learned something else. The turtle's head. When the turtle head is pointing straight ahead, it tells you, go straight. When it's pointing to the left, guess what? Go left. To the right, go right. And if the features, the stone features associated with it have not been destroyed, it will lead you to the next stone feature, even if you can't see it. This is not coincidence. This is a plan. Turtle cairns here, let's go. Turtle cairn all the way out in Colorado, again, Arizona, New Mexico. We just uncovered several turtle cairns in northern Alabama that are built identical to this one and others found here. They are the same wherever we go across the country. Now, turtle cairns can be very small, no larger than the head of that turtle cairn, or turtle cairns can be so large, you may even miss it. And here's an example. This is a turtle cairn in New York State, and you can see the dimensions, 55 feet long, 25 feet wide, and 15 feet high. And when you first see that turtle cairn standing next to it, you don't see it. It's so large, you see the stone piles, but you don't get the whole image. It's only when you walk away from it and look back, you get the overall experience. So you got to look for small and large. Stone piles. This stone pile is here in New York State. It's 75 by 30 by 12 feet high. All of the stones in that stone pile are tipped towards the center. They're in like this and stacked in the form of inverted and normal and inverted arches. To give it structural integrity, it can sustain earthquake, frost, and other damage. What we found on them, those are the width and they run along the length and the width of primary concentrated flows coming into one of the sites. So several flows may come into a site, but the big one, the wide one, becomes the primary, the most important flow, and that's marked with the biggest features. And that is what it looks like. They're huge. Go out west, I don't care where you go, you will find more stone features like it. This is a big one in Colorado that is actually partly covered with sand. When they tested on it to see how high it was originally, it's over 9 feet. So there's another feature. You see a short wall. This wall is only 22 feet long, sitting in the woods, and a tree happens to be growing up by it. If farmers built these walls, how do you explain that wall? It doesn't enclose any crops. And what are you gonna do with your sheep when you're up there? Put them alongside the wall and say, don't move? I don't think it'll work. But what did we find? As we tested this, this is the width of a concentrated flow. When you go to Nazca and you study the geoglyphs there, in other parts of the world, you find similar markers to that marker. It's a universal marker on this. It shows you the width of the flow in another way. Instead of cairn, they show a line with other features and says, that's width. And when we go to Arizona, Colorado, Montana, guess what? We get the same feature. Again, they're uniform all throughout the area. Vertical stone slab. A slab of stone, very narrow, usually within a few inches thick, and then the slab itself put in vertically in between bedrock feature. Wedged in a couple of feet, because if you go over and try to move it, it is rigid. These are found along Native American trails. They map the course of concentrated flows in the groundwater and the direction of the slab, the narrowness of it, like this one, looking this way, points the directions you want to go from site to site, from place to place. Now, these are also called Manitou stones as spiritual guidance of where you are and where you're going. This particular one is in Arizona, and you can't see it very clearly, but right in here is an Anasazi Road, where it's associated with an Anasazi Road. So we know it's on a trail, very clear. Now, when you see features like that, it gets complicated, because you have to realize that nothing is by itself. The Native Americans didn't do anything simple. When you look at a stone feature, it has his cultural markers on it. It has his tribal markers on it. It has his clan markers on it. It has his historical markers on it. It is associated with the three worlds. So all kinds of things play into that individual feature, and I will show you. I'm going to show you another vertical stone. Don't read the caption. Look at the stone first. What does that look like? Now you can read the caption. You see a duck. You see the head. You see the body. You see the eye. Are you seeing a duck or not? Do you see a duck? You don't see duck? Now, if you see that in 3 dimensions, it will stop you dead in your tracks. In 3 dimensions, it's a duck. And there's no other duck. It's a duck, and I don't mean bend down, watch out for something. It's a quack duck. Now, what's interesting is when you go to the opposite side, You go to the other side and look at that. This is the other side. Now up here, hidden in the eaves, I have, it looks like a cat feature. See the cat head? Look careful. This is the slope of the forehead, the nose, and then down to the body. When you see it in 3 dimension, you will stop in your tracks because you're gonna say, that looks just like a cat. Here's one stone that is a trail marker. It's giving you direction. It's on a concentrated flow and it has effigies built within it. And that's a simple one. They get more complicated. But that is a cat feature. Tripod rocks. Now, we have a big one down here in New Jersey, not far from here. And it's labeled as a glacier erratic. Many of you know David Epstein. Dave Epstein took me down there and he says, let's go look at that. You're gonna love this one. And we went. And it's more than just a glacier erratic. The 2 boulders next to it are on the concentrated flow and show the flow curves. And then here you got tripod rock, those who know what I'm talking about, the 2 big boulders. Go beyond the 2 big boulders and you hit the woods. Only a few feet distance. Step into the woods and look what's before you. 3, 4 boulders in a line, which are a width marker indicating the width of the flow. So we have 4 Native American features there. People look at that one. Now, if you know tripod rock, it's much more bigger than this and heavier. But people look at that boulder and say, how could they have lifted that? If you ever go to the Giza area of Giza and see the pyramids, the stones in the pyramids were bigger and heavier than that. Have you ever been to Human in Peru? It's the cultural center of the Inca above Cusco. If you ever go there and you go at that place, it's at basically 12,000 feet elevation. And when you get there, some of the stones are the size of a tractor trailer unit. Cab and trailer combined. Now, how high? As high as this room? This wide from here to the wall and longer than the room is long from here. All right, pick that as a cubic block. It was mined out by the Inca, brought 3 miles to Human, and risen upright within the wall. At 12,000 feet? No, it wasn't 12,000 feet. You gotta figure one more thing. Where they cut it out was at 9,000 feet. Where they brought it to was 12,000 feet on the mountain, 3,000 foot elevation and high elevation, and raised it upright. One of the group of scientists from UMass went down and studied that. When they saw it, they said it's unbelievable, impossible. They went down, they took the dimensions, they came back, they made a scale model of it, and then they wrote a paper on it. And this is their conclusion. They did it, and we don't know how they did it. That's right. They did it. You can't estimate, you can't underestimate what you think is a primitive culture. I've studied cultures all over the world and primitive cultures for all my life, and I've never found a primitive culture. Whenever I go to what's considered a primitive culture, I learn things that I didn't know before. And some of that knowledge was lost and then brought back. There's the stones underneath. They form an elongated triangle. When you go underneath and look at the triangle, it points the direction of the concentrated flow and where the bedrock fracture is. It tells you where to go, where to follow. Geologists have taken me on with this and said, well, yeah, because that's in a glaciated area and that's nothing to do with natives. Here's one in Arizona. It has never been glaciated in Agua Fria National Monument. And here we have a stone, a boulder, a large boulder sitting on 3, creating an elongated triangle and doing the same thing. Repetition, repetition, wherever we go. Snake walls, watch for them. Meandering walls through the forest, most of the time, they don't intersect anything. They don't form squares and stuff like that. So what you have is you have something different. You don't protect crops with this. You don't put cattle in a specific area and say, stay there with this. And the result is they also have a snakehead. And these are typical Native American features. The snake is also very important. Many Native American First Nations see this as the communicator to the underworld, snakes, because of being around springs. This one's not far from here. Here's one in Alabama. Not only was it a snake wall 400 feet long, but when we got to the end of the snake wall, oh, I'm sorry. This is what it looked like as a snakehead raising up. Now, we didn't see the duck, but let's see if you see this. Do you see the eye, the mouth, and the nose of the snakehead? Now, what are the chances of that being coincidentally placed there by nature at the end of a snake wall? And this is common. You want more evidence? Let's go to Arizona. Here's a snake wall, 250 feet long. You look at it, even looks like the undulations of a snake. The snakehead is here. I'll take you in on the snakehead. The snakehead is 9 feet tall, about 14 feet long. And it has two fangs standing up where they put two rocks for fangs, and look at the tongue. When you follow that to the end, it has 5 buttons at the tail end. What are the buttons for? Rattlesnake. It even tells you what species the snake is, a rattlesnake with its 2 fangs out, meaning it could bite you and hurt you. It's a rattlesnake. It's huge. And it's on a concentrated flow in the middle of many other ceremonial stone features. Watch out when you do this again. All the features can have other features built in. Here's another example. You're following a snake wall and all of a sudden you see what we call windows in here. These are normal and inverted arches all of a sudden. They indicate where you have a concentrated flow going here and another concentrated flow intersecting it. And it works every time. And they have these types of systems. Now, how many farmers build walls with that kind of a construction in it? You? You put windows in yours?
Just comes out there.
Not that way. But this we are looking at with some of the top architects in the world right now who have come on board with us and showing that this is not a European style technique for walls, not common to Europeans who came and colonialized the area. And the walls were documented as being here when the surveyors put the patents in for the first Dutch. They described some of these walls saying, these walls are Indian walls, I hate that term, because it's a misnomer, but Indian walls, and we're here before we put it in. What does that tell you historically? It's a Native American wall. Here's another one. This one's in Alabama. And here we have similar construction. It's like a fingerprint. It's like DNA. It's universal. What happens now? You're building along and you're on a nice roly-poly hill and you're building your cairns and your circles, and bam, you come to a cliff. And you want to show where the flow goes under the mountain. How do you do that? You don't have Velcro and super glue and steel reinforcement rods. You can't build the cairn out of the side of the mountain. What do you use? Petroglyphs and petrographs. Now, here's another thing is controversy with me. I have been asked to talk to several conferences that are pictograph conferences of Native American art. Don't call them petrographs to Native Americans is an insult. Because this is hieroglyphics, this is written language. When they first started taking open and going to see the pyramids in Egypt, they looked at what was on the walls there and called it petroglyphs. Petrograph, look at that. Oh, we have all these things. Then they realized it's a language when they got the Rosetta Stone. Same thing happened with the Mayans and other cultures, and this is a language. What does this tell you? Well, I've already explained some of this. What is that circle representing in the stone feature world? I'm sorry, I got hard hearing. Where are you? Speak up. Who said it? What? So what mark that?
Circle.
You build a cairn, it's a circle. You build a stone pile, a circle. So what did they use on the wall? The drawing of the base of the cairn or the circle. And this was a while for me to figure out. I'm looking at it, trying to figure it out. And then all of a sudden it just dawned on me one day, my God, it's just as simple. You're taking the base and using it. What's that? What kind? Crescent cairn, Herod, U-shaped. And what is it telling you? This is the way of the trail. Here goes the trail. Here's the water source. And what are you gonna find when you get up there? Animals to hunt. It's a hunting ground. And now you got your explanation and the people coming. So all of a sudden, this, prior to this interpretation, mine, they were, oh, that's the moon. Well, in some cases, it is the moon showing the various phases of the moon, but it's also showing a trail marker. So now we get into petroglyphs and petrographs. Now, these two happen to be in Arizona. Notice there's different. One is a circle and one is concentric circles. And we have different terms for this. Over here, we call it a sunburst. Over here, they use the term shield, like a shield in defending. But watch what happens. Shields are culturally identifiable. So what you find, other people got this before I did, certain types, designs of shields tell you what culture put it there. Like if you ever go to Arizona and study the Sinagua people, you learn what a Sinagua shield looks like in a pictograph. You'll never forget it because it's replicated wherever those people were. And then when you get into the area of the Hopi and you see the design of the Hopi shield, it is nowhere as similar to a Sinagua shield. And what does it tell you? Here you're in Sinagua territory. You just crossed into Hopi territory. Yes, you're walking on the water. Yes, you're in line with the spiritual world, but you're on our turf. And you got your boundary markers. Now let's go to New York State, and it shows the width of the flow. Here's one we just found recently. This is the shield format of a petroglyph in New York State. Concentric circles, lines crossing it, and like feather decorations coming out right on a concentrated flow. Now, what's interesting, when I go to study a site, I often tell the people, especially if they don't believe, don't tell me about the site. Put me in the area where the site is. And I'm gonna start dowsing and want to find the concentrated flow. Once I find the concentrated flows, I'll follow them and see if they take me to the site. And then I'll find the different features based on following the water. Guess what? It has worked every time. This is a problem with the theory because we can't find an exception. It's too perfect, but it works. And the more people that have done this have found that it's worked. And that's how we found that petroglyph. And then if you go, this one is another one in our area. And this is more of a sunburst petroglyph, because when you outline it, it forms a perfect circle, and it's mapping a concentrated flow and an area across the ridgeline out here. So we are finding petroglyphs using this technique, follow the groundwater, concentrated flows, and you find the petroglyphs. Now, how many of you realize that it's very difficult to find petroglyphs here? You know that? Yes. Petroglyphs here are rare. Why? Our weather has knocked them to heck and gone. All right, because of all the frost and all of that. And then you have lichens, and leeches, and other types of things that have eroded them, and then all the construction we throw in. So it's very difficult to find them, and we're finding them now more than we ever had in the past using this technique. The next one, I think you're gonna be surprised at. We found this one a couple of months ago and it knocked my socks off. It is just incredible. You see the body, you see the legs, you see the nose, you see an eye, you see an ear. It is a three-dimensional relief petroglyph that you haven't seen yet. It's the first time you've seen this one. And there is a bear, 2 feet by 2 feet square, where two concentrated flows come together and then form one flow in another direction. Dead center, bam, a bare three-dimensional petroglyph. And we don't think it has ever been recorded or found before. Following the water, following the water. It's just an amazing feature. It's the only one we know of like that in the lower Hudson, northern New Jersey area. Remember that guy? Turtle, culturally modified or not? Well, guess what? It's a calendar. And we can prove it because we sat there on solstice just before, the winter solstice. And what happens? That head is positioned in a position that when equinox occurs, the sun goes right down the mouth. When summer solstice rises over here on this side of the head, the light shines in right through the gap here behind the head and comes out this side. In winter solstice sunrise, the sunlight hits through here and comes out the other side. It's their calendar. And it's surrounded by other stone features. Do we use something like that today, or is this pretty darn proof? We use it? No, we use it. Do we use the star? Do we use the sun and the moon for our calendar? The whole calendar's based on it. The phases of the moon, the rising and sun and everything else. And you know what's interesting by our calendar? We have to correct it every 4 years, and this is a leap year. Let's take a really primitive culture, an ancient culture called the Mayan culture, right? 1,000 years plus ago, must be very primitive, right? Their calendar has to be corrected in 365 days. That's 365 years. So their calendar is 361 years more accurate than ours. Primitive culture? I don't think so. The skills, the knowledge of the ancients is profound. And we may have lost that knowledge, but now we've regained it. And when you look at stuff like this, it becomes the knowledge of the past. We find many features like this. Astronomical combinations of features, which are literally marking events in the sky, are common. We found one recently, a guy called us up after reading about our presentations in that and called me up and says, I got an Orion symbol on my property. And we went up there and we mapped out the stone features, and he has Orion on the ground in stone features. So this is common. Culturally modified trees. They didn't always use just stone features. This tree here is an L-shaped branch. And look at this one. I'll show you a close-up. It comes here and here. Two separate trees were merged together. What do you call it? I forget the word.
Right.
Yes. And then put straight up to grow to mark something. And what do they mark? They are always found along Native American trails. They point to water sources. Now, remember, when you're following a concentrated flow, you're not thinking about drinking the water. That will come eventually. Your key point for being on there is the alignment of the spiritual world, the present world, and the underworld, and you can ask for guidance. Eventually, they will give you the gift of life and water. So you're not always looking for water every time you're on a flow, you're looking for guidance. And these these trees are actually local. And here's the L-shaped one. And you can find these clear across the United States, wherever you have trees. I've documented them all the way up into Alaska. Same type of culturally modified tree with the same results. This one, eliminate that stump, but you see how it was combined, grafted together here. And they often form a burrow right here in the tree by putting something in there to create a burrow so that it's pointing. And this, when you follow it, just no more than a few hundred yards, it leads to one of the most productive springs in our region. Coincidence? Two culturally modified trees lead to a spring, which is one of the most reliable and pure in our region. Watch for culturally modified trees. We are now finding them around here, and there's more than we ever anticipated, even in spite of the iron ore manufacturing here using charcoal and cutting down so much of the forest. There's still plenty of them here. And here are some in Arkansas, similar, to show this is found clear across the continent, wherever we go. We have them in Alabama on the project. And like I said, you follow that flow far enough, you will be blessed with the gift of life. You will find the springs marked by a cairn giving you water. Now, what's happened to most of them? Where they're up on a mountain in a tough area where you can't build a Holiday Inn, your home, or something else, they still exist. But where they are down lower, where we now occupy, what did we do? The Dutch moved in and said, oh, wow, we got a spring. Well, what do they use to protect their spring and keep it clean and keep it flowing? A spring house. And look what happened. Somebody conveniently left a pile of stones for us to make our spring house. And so they dismantled the Native American cairn and made the spring house underneath. But if the site isn't too badly disturbed, there will be stone features all across the mountain leading you to that point. How far back? We have tested this all the way back to Native American paleo sites. This site is 11,000 to 10,000 BP before present. 10 to 11,000 year old site. Crowfield people, it's in northern Pennsylvania. It was done as a blind test. The people who knew where that site was said, you see this road? Here's a 4-mile stretch of the road. Somewhere along it, there's a paleo site. Find it. That's the kind of test. Priscilla was there, we found it in 30 minutes. Follow the water. Find the bedrock fracture. Follow it to the site. They didn't tell me below the site was actually a spring in the woods. But when I found it, and look at the Crowfield dots in black, right on the concentrated flow. Ancient people going back to the first who came to North America were following this procedure. What does it do for sites now? When you're analyzing a site, normal archaeology, we get a group of people like you would form a line. We walk across the site, we all go up those little metal pins with flags on. Arrowhead, put a stick. Oh, piece of pottery, put a stick, put a such a thing in. Oh, I think I got a hearth where there's a fire pit. And then we put them up on the map and we look at them and we say, what does it tell us? Many times it becomes a little bit like Old McDonald Farm, here a feature, there a feature, everywhere's a feature. And it makes it a little more difficult to understand. But what happens when you add the water? Bam. All the features are connected on water. Our evidence is showing that on a common site, average site, 85 to 90% of all the artifacts are found, or structures, artifacts, stone features, 100% are found on the concentrated flows. And why is that? Because let's say you're here at cairn 1, and let's say I'm here at cairn 4. Even though we are separated from each other, we are connected by the sources of the underground matrix of water in line with each other in the present, in line with the underworld, the present world, and the sky above for guidance. It is all part of that religious concept. And a lot of people tell me, oh, they weren't religious, they were spiritual. Get out of here. It's a religion. It's a belief in creation and overwhelming power. It's as much a religion as any other modern religion. And it was your ancestors' ancient religion, if you go that far enough. So this cuts the chase on some of the analysis of archaeological sites. I've been other places. The Native Americans aren't alone, because I went to England and I started looking at stone features there on request. And this is a famous place called Avebury Avenue. There are, for several miles, there's a line of stones where there's inverted large boulders here and in vertical large boulders here, creating this avenue in the middle that leads from Avebury. You want to guess where it goes to? Stonehenge. And what is it marking? The width of a concentrated flow. For years, people have said Avebury is surrounded by significant springs that were worshipped by the people in the early Iron Age and before. And it's true. And when you get to Stonehenge, that led me to Stonehenge, I found 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 concentrated flows all intersect at Stonehenge and form what is consistent to be a pool or ponding of water underneath, which creates in the Iron Age, in the ancient cultures, like a portal up between the worlds. We just say split, right? And what do we call it? The portal. It's a sacred portal. It's been a sacred portal in the history and the oral history in the minds of the Munsee, Lenape, and other regional tribes as far back as they've lived here. And the association to other cultures in the world are the same. Then the question comes up. We're so keen on saving Stonehenge. They want to put a new 4-lane in by Stonehenge, which they already have one. And they're up in arms. It's a sacred site. It's a part of World Heritage. It's a historical icon. How can you do that? You know, we fought like crazy to save Split Rock, and we're still fighting to save it. How is it in other parts of the world, sites like Split Rock become World Heritage and saved in an incident, when we are fighting to save indigenous, Native American, First Nation sites that have been recorded dating before the first Europeans, by the first Europeans who came here, and saying, oh, they're not Native American. Well, E.T. didn't bring them. I worked in Oscar Lines, and there's no evidence that E.T. built the Oscar Lines. It is human endeavor. Do I believe perhaps sometime in the ancient past, humans were visited by extraterrestrials from other things, maybe millions of years ago? Yes, I don't doubt that. We're not alone in the universe. I don't believe that. But this is Native American. Not that, what I'm talking about. And this is saved in other parts of the world, but not here in our own backyards. And we need your support. We need your support while you have our car, my car, is to when you're hiking up there and you see some of the features I've showed you, to report back and say, hey, look what I found. Because there's sites we don't know exist out there. And we want to document it before they're destroyed. And if possible, we want to preserve what's left because 90% of this stuff has been already destroyed. We're so eager to save a house that George Washington slept in, but not so eager to save a ceremony, save a burial ground up by Cornwall where they want to put a warehouse. A few years ago, not a few years ago, 25 years ago, a group of Native Americans did something. I wish I had the article on this. They drove up to the National Cemetery, Arlington National Cemetery, with a couple of trucks loaded with screen tables, buckets, all kinds of shovels and hoes. And when they got stopped by the guard, they says, wait a minute, they says, oh, we want to study your culture. We've come to have an archaeological day. It's a national cemetery. You can't do that. The reverse is not always true. We're fighting to preserve the Native American sites on a daily basis, and still many are destroyed. Now the ceremonial stone sites are important. Here it is in Europe. If you cross the English Channel, you go to a place, the Karnak, and Karnak's famous for these rows of stone megaliths that go across for miles across the region. They're just like England. They're just like North America. They're just like the lines of Nazca. And now other people from around the world, in Japan, in Siberia, in other areas, are reporting back to me, we've got the same thing. This story that we told today is not a story about the Native American alone. It's a story about the history of mankind, of all humans. Because not only is it part of the Native American culture, it's a part of every one of our ancient cultures that we're trying to preserve. Based on our research, similarity of surface mapping exists in these regions and all the regions I've studied and other people with me. It is a universal human characteristic. In addition to that, in North America, these sites have been neglected. And the data strongly suggests they are characteristics of Native American cultures. Irregardless of the time of the culture, what historical period, be it paleo, archaic, or woodland, as we call them, or the region, arid desert of southwestern United States, or the woodlands of the Northeast. The stone features represent a common written language, a guide to maneuvering your way through the great American what we call America today. What I love is when I hear Lewis and Clark discovered. Wait a minute. Who was there to greet him? Briar Rabbit and Smokey the Bear? Native Americans. But we often claim it to something as historic history because we wrote it. Well, news is historic history in North America goes back to the first Europeans. And I said it wrong. The first Native Americans. The Europeans came much later. Pardon my mistake out there in fiber world, correct that, goes back to the first Native Americans. And we want to preserve this. And the the National Archives have accepted this in as significant historical documentation and is maintaining my archival file and my other researchers' files on all the sites that we do with permission of whoever the property owner is. And in some cases, in states, we are having trouble getting, for example, state preservation agencies to approve these documents to go into the archival file because they still don't accept them as Native American. You don't have enough evidence. And that's my story. And that's the Native American story. And that's our human passage through history story of how this all relates. I got 3 books out on that. I got one out there now, $30 for each copy on the table that currently exists. If you want to order a book, it's $35 and I will send it to you. And I'm open for questions. All right, back when the virus came, I lost my hearing pretty much, so I've got hearing aids turned on high. So I'll be walking toward you. Speak loudly, give me your question. If you all can't hear it, I'll repeat it for you and we'll see what we can get.
So in America, since there's so many features that are transcontinental shared features, is there a theory about where they may have started and spread from?
This is a good question. Where did it start? And I think it goes back to the earliest people. Because when I was in Kenya looking for groundwater just 10 years ago and 20 years after I was working on this, we also find stone features associated with concentrated flows. The Aborigines in Australia use basically the same style features. So we believe that it's something that was carried with human beings from place to place from a common ancient source that could go back much more than 20, 30,000.
Just a quick follow-up. What about the features that are more specific to America, like the snakehead or the turtle or?
All right, see, that depends on the climate in the geographical region you're in. Because, all right, I've done, for example, Alberta, Canada, British Columbia, up into the Yukon and Alaska. And so in southern Alberta, you'll find turtle cairns where you find turtles. When you get up into Alaska, you find shapes like salmon. And you find shapes like the buffalo head. For example, when you get up there, some of the cairns are shaped like a buffalo head with horns. And that, which way the horns point tells you what, which way to go. So it's a thing that relates to your current environment and what lives and occupies in that zone. Also, building materials. Here, they're using one type of building material. There's a lot of rock to be had. In Nazca, there is no vegetation out on the desert. So they just drew them on the floor of the desert. you're using a different format. But irregardless of the shape of a cairn or the design of a stone pile, it's still the same. And what do I mean? You type on a computer, you choose Arial, and you type in that format. I choose bold, and I type in that format. And he chooses italics, and he types in that format. But what's true about every A in those formats? An A is an A is an A. A one is a one is a one. And so you have different styles which adapt to culture depending on region. But the ultimate thing is you gotta realize it's the shape, the basic design of that format, that feature that tells you what it is. And that's another thing that's a whole nother study of this. So you have to keep that in mind. Yes.
In the concentrated flows, are there other ways to measure it, or is this just with the bonding?
No, there's other ways. I mean, you can do it today with
Like you said.
seismic, ground penetrating radar, satellite imagery, and just keep on going.
And you can tell the width of the.
You can tell a lot of where it gets tricky is when they're very narrow. When they're very narrow, I find that's when my dowsing pays off more than otherwise.
How did they know back then?
I'm sorry, I gotta get close.
How did they know back then where those water?
Well, that's what I was saying. There are 1,000 ways of telling. I'll give you another one. We went up in the Andes and we studied, this is in Nazca now, we studied where we had a bedrock fracture. And then we followed it downslope and we got out on the coastal plain, which is the Atacama Desert, okay? Now you got the Andes, 20,000 foot elevation versus 1,000 feet elevation or less of the coastal plain. Over millions of years, a lot of debris has come down. And so when you're out on the coastal plain, it's often covered by sand and gravels and very difficult to see where the bedrock fractures are. We're out there one day doing seismic, that's setting off a blank charge of powder and testing the vibrations coming back and carrying electromagnetic coils, which you spring out 150 feet, got to carry a battery and you send an electro wave down into the ground, pick it up back, and it tells you how fast it traveled, whether there's water or not. You know how much those things weigh? Reporting them through the desert because we couldn't drive there. And we're staying overnight. And on the way, we're mapping exactly where this fault is and where we're finding water that we can't see. And we got a registered depth to it of 125 feet. And then the second night, we stayed overnight. We had 2 tents, 4 people. We went to sleep, we woke up the next morning, and I walked out, the 2 geologists were already out and they're going. You could read their lips. I can't believe this. Did you hear that? I heard that. I can hear the water. And we got out, and sure enough, you could hear the water flowing under your feet. So what do we say? Put the equipment away. We're gonna map this by listening, because we had no ambient sound. There were no nearby roads, communications, there were no radio stations or we already saw it gone. We were in a pure environment and used our senses, and we followed the sound of the water and mapped it. Then we went back, got the equipment out, and we went in and followed the water using the equipment, and it was right on. There's 1,000 ways you can do it. You can see it in the minerals and the way they are left in the fault lines and all kinds of things. There's just so many ways. You were next. Go ahead. Good picture. And so what does it have to do? Very likely, yes. Yeah, these are the things we want to investigate. You have a question?
Yeah, it's brilliant, thank you. But my question is, how do stone chambers and dolmens tie into this?
All right. Dolmens are consistently on groundwater sources where you have features built up with a cap. The chambers, I'm out on. The chambers, I still haven't got enough evidence to include it in my database for the following reason. In a number of chambers that other people were saying, this has to be done by Native Americans or something, I found perfectly cylindrical bored holes, modern drills. Native Americans didn't have modern cylindrical drills. All their drills are conal shaped drill holes. And I found other things associated with it, so I haven't included them yet. It's not that I dismissed them. I don't have enough evidence to add it into this discussion. But these things, we've tested time and time and time again. And right now, I'm involved with next week, I go to Alabama to work on a project helping the Cherokee identify sites like this. Because they have stone features that they don't have the knowledge of, and that's an important one. I didn't touch on. How come some Native American tribes have lost this knowledge?
Christians.
They wiped out. What happened? His people were among the first to say hello to the Dutch when they arrived in North America. They were among the first cultures to be faced with the foreign invaders. And I say invader, and same thing up in Plymouth and the Cherokee down south. But even before the first Dutch settlement settled along the island down there, along Long Island and Manhattan, what happened? Fishing boats and explorers came through and carried diseases such as smallpox, mumps, measles, which were not common to the Native American immune system, and wiped out as much as the estimates are 85 to 95% of populations. And what is the result of that? You lost knowledge. Much of it was oral history. And when the old ones die off and can't pass it on, it may be left to a young, I always do the scenario of grandfather, son, and child. So here's grandpa. I'm the son, and here's our child. Remember age, they didn't live much past 50, 60 years old. Here's the old one, 60 years old. Here's me in my mid-20s, maybe, well, let's say late 20s. And here's my son, who's only 8, 9 years old. In that culture, very likely the keeper of the oral history, which means you inherit that position. So he got it from his father or his grandfather and passed it down. Now he's passing it to me and I'm passing it to him. In comes a pandemic. He's one of the first to go. In comes the Dutch and start saying, this is my land now. We bought it from you. We gave you these. Stuff like this. We never thought that way. All land is commonly owned. And now you got war and they attacked and drove you out. Most of his people are in Canada and Oklahoma. What happened to the oral history? I got killed fighting the Dutch. Now out of the ashes, when it settles down, out comes the young man and the tribe runs to him and says, what's happening? Tell us based on our oral history. He's lost so much of it. And that's why so much of that knowledge was lost and now it's being found again. Where am I getting a lot of my help from? I went and spent time with the Navajo and Hopi and people like that. They were among the last to be conquered. And the Tsuut'ina up by Calgary. They weren't defeated until the 1878 when they finally surrendered. They were still nomadic on the plains around Calgary and kept their oral history. And I was with people that were 3 generations out. Jim Bigboom, who was my age, his grandfather was a nomadic leader of one of the tribal groups of the Tsuut'ina tribe and surrendered when they were finally beat down to less than 100 people. So he had direct contact back to his grandfather and his father in oral history. There wasn't a gap of hundreds of years. And so when we go and we talk to those people, there we have knowledge that of what existed in the ancient past based on their traditions. One of the things I've done with Native Americans out west It's in my book. It's the last image in my book. And, I was working with the Navajo and it took a couple of years for them to settle in because you're an outsider. And then they trusted me. We sat in council and they said, we have a chant that is the oldest chant we know in our culture. And it talks about going from a place called the ancient city of Tohatchi to Coyote Canyon. And they said, what's interesting about the chant, it describes exactly what you're telling us. And it's a chant that goes and repeats things. And it says, go from Tohatchi, go from the finger tall. In Tohatchi is a small mesa unit that's only, right, Priscilla's shaking her head, this big, that stands up about 30 feet tall in the middle of nowhere, like a finger. And around there is a major ancient site that dates back more than 1,000 years of occupation. And it says, go from Kawachi and follow the stones. And follow the stones till you get to the coyote and look at the coyote and follow the coyote's nose. And then look for the horizon. The pointer will lead you to them. And what's up on the horizon after you turn at the coyote? A stone cairn sitting up on a ridge and way off in the distance. The problem was they had lost the coyote site, the coyote head. They didn't know where it was. They too were captured, driven off their land during the Civil War in 1863, 62, 63, incarcerated at one of the forts. At the end of the Civil War, they turned around and says, oh, you can go home. Well, what happened by then? The federal government came in and laid claim to the land, and all of a sudden he looks back and this guy's on his property. Who are you? Well, I'm a settler. Yeah, I got the land in Greenback. I'm a former Civil War soldier. Now it's my land. Get off. And they couldn't get back. They lost that. Who died in incarceration more than anybody else? The older ones who were the keeper of the oral history. They lost where the coyote site was. And the elders sitting there and the keeper of the oral history and the spiritual leaders said, you can find it. I said, chant. Give me the chant in Navajo. Then give me the chant in English. And now we're going to Tohatchi. We went to Tohatchi. And I said, I'm circling the pointer stone, finding the concentrated flows, and like 6 or 7 intersected there. And I said, I'm going to find the widest. And when I hit the widest one, I'm going to follow it and see where it leads me. Priscilla, how long did it take to get to the coyote head?
About 20 minutes.
20 minutes later. We came up over a knoll and I just looked ahead of me and the coyote head's pictured in my book. You can, if you've got the book, some of you can share it. The coyote head is like from here to that wall and from the floor up, the perfect profile of a coyote head. And it just knocks your socks off here. I'll get it for you. And stopped me dead in the tracks. I turned around to my wife and said, watch out. They got really big coyotes here. And she looked up and she just jumped. And there it is. It's on page 148 of my book. And that story is in the book. And it tells the Navajo verify this. All right. So this tells you how it comes together. We're using Native American ancient oral history stories and combining it with blind studies for me. I'm using blind studies for them to see if they can match what I'm doing, and it comes together. You're next.
This is both for you and for the chief. What is the best way that we as just?
How can you help us?
Well, that, but particularly in this area to, like, with development and stuff.
Eyes first. When you're out walking and you see these kinds of features, the stone features like in the middle, You have my card, call, report it in. GPS, you take a picture, you get the GPS. Most phones have a GPS unit, I get the GPS. And also a photograph. If there are more than one feature, photograph them, send it to us. Then we will go out and look at that. If we get permission to cross on the property, that's the big one, we'll get permission, we will go and document it. And then what we're doing with landowners is saying to them, look, you have this feature, you have 10 acres. And on 1/4 of 1 acre is these 2 Native American features. Could you say in the deed to preserve them for future? Not to take all your land, right, Perry? We're not gonna, we can't take all the land back, or you'd be rich with owning all of Manhattan. The point is that we will ask to preserve pieces for the trail conference when they see it. The same thing, to report these places, so we document it, because there's so many more out there that we haven't documented. I don't have enough time in life to do it. I need 10 lifetimes to even put a dent in this place, let alone working around the rest of the country. So whatever you see, document, even if you're suspicious, I don't know, maybe I'm crazy. No, sometimes the most craziest observation turns out to be the biggest breakthrough in understanding this.
And what,
Second of all, support. When we are asking for assistance from the community, like working on saving Split Rock, letters of support, letters of encouragement to preserve and protect these features in the state parks and other places. In New York State, we do have difficulty getting this preserved on a state level. And we need more support there. There are still enough of archaeologists out there that study Native American archaeology that don't believe this is part of the Native American culture. And especially here. We need that support, and I'm turning it over to Chief Perry. Add on whatever you want to
I'm
say.
just gonna say,
Stand up and let them have it.
I started to say when I was speaking,
No, go.
Split Rock was brought to us a second time from the Mongols in Colombia, that their elders sent us here to alert the world that it needs to be presented because it was a portal.
Wait, let me back
I
up.
wanted
You're
to say
missing something on
say
that.
it.
What he's missing on that is from Colombia, a Native American group. Now, remember, the Native American indigenous in Colombia and here,
Yeah, they weren't.
they contacted him. And he never talked with them before.
Right,
They didn't know about Split, he hadn't told anybody down there about Split Rock. Now say it.
yeah, well, let me put it this way, we're having a meeting like here comes these people in, dressed up in their native dress, they're talking about portals and I'm thinking, we're all from New York, all of us, and we're going, I'm not Harry Potter, I don't know who these people are. And then they said a few things about Split Rock that only maybe 1 or 2% of the Ramapos knew. But so from there on, we formed a partnership, and right now they're in Greenland. Their elders told them to go around the world because I guess there's 7 portals in the world that are interconnected. But anyway, the whole thing is there's another one in Australia. The Mongol people have one, and they call that Split Rock also.
Yep. I
But
agree.
what I want to say is the issue in New York is something everybody here knows about it's about greed. I had a very influential person up by Split Rock with me, actually was one of the last president's friends. And we're talking and all of a sudden he jumped out the car, he run over on the stone, he says, man, what a power place overlooking Manhattan. I'm gonna hit him with a rock, he didn't even know where he was. They weren't interested in culture or people or history. So the biggest danger in this area is simply common sense. I want everybody to have 5, 6, 10 Bentleys. I have about 2 minutes worth of common sense, decency. So I don't mean to get off, but it's about greed in this area. It's not about culture. It's about look what I got. And if I just wanted with this, we're doing
The value of land and what can we build on?
we're moving away from that.
Is removing away the historical importance of what exists. And this is what he's saying, and this is where we need support of people to step up. So when you hear this in the news, when you see us, saying that we need support to do this, if you believe that these are part of Native American culture, we need people to speak up and give support. And that helped a lot with split lot.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of people came forth and said, yes, we agree. And multiple Native American First Nations from all across North America and some from South America. I was out west in Montana with a Chippewa. And one of the Chippewas said to me, we have a chant that describes a site in Pennsylvania. You did that one.
I just want to say one small thing about land. Oh, I'm sorry. Land.
Let me finish this one. The guy from Chippewa, the chief from the Chippewa, they wrote down the description of the stone ceremonial site in Pennsylvania. Came here and matched it with the existing site. It was in their oral history carried across the continent. That's pretty good. Don't get too carried away because we gotta let them go home.
That's 2 sentences about land back. I don't know who invented that term, but it's not about taking land back. That's not at all. I've actually had people, when we first had a deed return, 1737 deed, to actually this whole area and then into New York. People actually called up crying, are you gonna take our, no, that's as dumb as thinking I'm gonna go to Manhattan tomorrow. Tax everybody, so that's just a term, that's just know that.
The idea is to talk to the people who are the property owner, be it the federal government, national park, state, Forest Service, New York State land ownership, towns, counties and that, and private landowners and ask them to protect a tiny part of their property. We have done this for the last several years successfully throughout the area. And literally, it's overwhelming to me how many are willing to do that. Towns, counties, and other organizations that have said they do this. We are getting great support on this, but there still is resistance. There are people out there trying to get people to believe this is all a hoax. And they shouldn't believe it.
We have a question online. Someone works for a state park and they're curious on where they should start. Trying to find different rock formations and.
In state parks, I have spoken to, in terms of the Palisades Park Commission, I've spoken to each of the people that are in charge of the different parks, be it Fawnstock, Minnewaska, down to Baird Mountain and stuff like that. I have given presentations to some of their workers in cases in different parks to help them understand what to identify. And I'm willing to give other presentations to make them aware of what to look for. We just tipped by the iceberg here, but it gave you a good taste of the basic formations. And then we can join together and explore this and identify these things. Right now, I have more sites to document, physically go see, than I'm going to live to see. There are so many coming out of the woodwork. But we want to have the agencies like state parks be aware so they can identify it by themselves. And that's the advantage of my book, because my book is literally the field guide as to how to identify these things, not only here, but across the continent. And so the use of this is very important.
Okay.
And so this is what we're trying to build. And that's why I said to you, if not a lot of people could made it today and that, and you want me to do another presentation, I'm often down in the area working with him on different things. And it's nothing for me within an hour of my house to come here and do another presentation. But to speak to groups and stuff like that, spread the news, make people aware, but have people come back and say, I saw something like that, and here's where it is. And then we try to get permission to go and research it. And then we talk to the people and say, look, this is what this is on your property. And she comes back and says, oh, I thought it was a sheep herder built it there, or, oh my God, I thought it was a farmer, or Art Deco. No, this, and how can we tell? And we can tell by various things in it. If you look at this, we'll go further. One more thing on further. There's your stone cairn. Does anybody see a pattern in that stone cairn?
Spiral.
What?
Looks like it's spiral.
It's a spiral. Here's your spiral coming up. How many people build this stone cairn that has a spiral built into it? When you're out doing trails, you build a cairn. How many times have you ever built a spiral
None,
in your cairn?
none.
See, that's my point. Within these features, I'm only touching the tip of the iceberg. The book talks much more detail. But what we're talking about, built within a feature, are other symbols and features. And so therefore, you know, you got a cairn, let us look at it. We may walk away and say, yes, that's a modern cairn. Or we might say, that's a Native American cairn, and this is why. So support in terms of backing up efforts to preserve the site. Petition. And that. Second of all, helping identify where they are and going out. We're working with Orange County Land Trust, Boulder County Land Trust, what do you call it? Hudson Highlands Land Trust. All of these groups now are on board helping identify it. Oh, here's something before you guys leave. You never mentioned the biggest thing. Here is, I don't know, it looks like some people picked these up. This is our Archaeology Association. We're having a special meeting to draw people to attend as members, to get membership. And it's on March, where is it here? March 15th. I'm bringing in Mike Bramley. You all know what the Black Earth area is up by Middletown and all the Mastodon. He's an expert on the Mastodon, and he's going to talk about the Bowser Mastodon site and how it's the first ritual kill of a Mastodon ever found, and how important to preserve it. So this is here. If you want one, please take one. You're welcome to join us at the meeting. We would love to have you. We're looking for more help. Why? We have so much work to do. We need more members. And if you want to get involved with archaeology, this is our area. And so we can help you. You can help us by attending and becoming a part of it. And that's about it. I can't think of much. Is there any other questions?
There was a question online.
Hold on.
That music.
Questions
What rock are we talking about?
What's that?
What split rock are we talking about?
So we're about right up here is the 2 miles away. And up on the top is the largest glacier erratic split boulder that we think in New York State, which is a part of it.
So I just did a quick Google search and
It's
Brooklyn and which one is being?
in the future. Here, you might pass them out to your people. Here, go. And in the future, once the Lenape fully secure it, we'll probably get tours.
Yeah, well, we're working to make it a world is.
Yeah.
Heritage.
We're very,
I don't know what the book was just recently in Brooklyn. He mentioned it.
yeah. And for those who are leaving, thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Groupon,
Yeah.
online,
Yeah, but I don't have.
first time here doing this,
Sites,
so
I
thank
need it here. If you've got a logo, we're gonna know. That's where we're at. Yeah. Next week.